This is a Gracelets audio presentation from Southern California professional Christian counselor Bill Faris. You can learn more about Bill and his counseling, speaking, and writing ministry at billfaris.com or by visiting him on Facebook at Bill Faris MPC. And now here's today's Gracelets audio message.
Hi, this is Bill Faris with another Gracelets audio podcast. We're excited to be together with you today in a discussion about parenting and culture and things related to culture as Christian parents, as Christian families. And I have with me my special guest today, my son, Christopher Faris. Say hi to the folks, Chris.
Good to be here. Hello.
And we've been already talking. This is actually the second podcast that we're doing together on the same day. And we've already been talking about a lot of things that are very fun to talk about, including the fact that Christopher and his wife, Colleen, are the parents of triplet girls.
Yes.
Say a word about that, Chris.
My wife and I, a little over 16 months ago, we became the parents of 3 beautiful girls at once, and they are healthy and doing well, and we are loving our new life, if not lack of sleep.
Yeah. And so in the other podcast that we did today, which will be up, available for listening, Chris goes into quite a bit of more detail about parenting multiples and about parenting in general as a new dad. But I'd like to talk a little bit more today about parenting in general, in particular with relationship to the culture and to how do we navigate the cultural waters as Christian parents. And one thing we talked about in our last time, Chris, was, I asked you, what is your vision for your kids? What is one thing that's really important to you as you look forward? And you said that they come to faith, that they come to know Jesus, that they come to know who they are in Christ and who God is. And so, that's on the table, like that's job one and all that. And there's just absolutely, that's the center point around which everything else revolves. But having said that, I'd like to really have us think through a little bit more together about, these issues related to reaching that goal and keeping our kids in a place where that can happen for them. And especially, Chris, you were raised, you're a pastor's kid, as are your 2 brothers and sister.
Proudly.
And, and your mom's a professional. She's a nurse and has been your whole life and her whole life and our whole 40 years together.
Yeah.
So, we come from a very, very certain kind of a family background. And you were also not only raised in the church, but you went for 3 years to a Christian high school.
I did.
And so what have you noticed about some of the differences in kind of Christian parenting and in both, as someone who was raised in a Christian home, also you have friends that were raised in Christian homes, some of whom are really thriving with God, some of whom are perhaps not. But what are some of the things that seem important to you to say to Christian parents about raising your kids well in a culture like ours without keeping them in a bubble?
2 stories immediately came to mind when you mentioned that. So first is my sister-in-law, Britt. I'll never forget the story, and I've actually repeated it multiple times. But she was talking about her family at church, and one day, some parents were kind of saying, like, aren't you worried about your daughter going to public school? And because she went to public school, and a lot of her friends at church went to private Christian schools. And so, they said something to the effect of, aren't you nervous about, what they talk about, and, what about sort of sexuality stuff, and what about, social issues, and, aren't you nervous? And her parents' response was that Britt overheard was, well, they can talk about that at school, but we'll talk about it as a family at the dinner table. And I just kind of think, like, man, you couldn't say it more perfect than that. And I don't just mean sitting down. When I hear that, I don't hear like a family sitting down and saying, no, that's right to think, and that's wrong to think, and that's right. And I think that's maybe the hardest thing for a lot of parents is you're kind of constantly navigating sort of being the gatekeeper for what can come into your home, but also giving your kids the chance to experience, certain things that may or may not be good for them, but they have to kind of figure that out themselves, and so and then you talk about it, you don't just leave it. Like, you have to be engaged in dialogue and stuff. But the second thing I'll mention is I remember it was my first year living off campus. I went to Biola University, which is a Christian university and very popular evangelical university in Los Angeles. And when I moved off campus, I remember having some friends who were all so excited because they could go drink.
They were free.
They were no longer in the youth group, sort of shackles. They were no longer in their homes. They were no longer in the dorms. They were now out on their own, and a lot of them now had all this new freedom. And it got to the point where I remember a friend of mine saying something to the effect of, "Yeah, I got an invite to a wedding, but there's not going to be any alcohol, so what fun is going to a wedding?" I'm like, you've been drinking for 6 months. Like, why is this now all of a sudden a thing? So anyway, I didn't understand that. And I think that's kind of the second thing that comes to mind is just if you restrict every kind of freedom, if you don't let your kids have the opportunity to fail, to make a mistake, and if you treat everything as we should be scared of everything out there in that dangerous world, when the kids are sort of no longer responsible to you and they're on their own, they're probably going to respond by many of them, especially in these very, very strict Christian homes. I see, and that's not just one person. I see this all the time.
Yeah.
Kids who I went to high school with. This is the advantage of Facebook, by the way.
Yeah.
Is
you can track the progress.
You have evidence now.
Yeah,
It's not like there's so much generalizing about, all those kids who do this or that. But no, I see it all the time. We went to Calvary together, and then some of us went to Biola together, other Christian schools, and then they just, there's just this no balance
Went
there.
off the map.
Yeah. And, for some kids, that's, I guess, just what they were meant to do. I don't know. But for others, I think some families get so caught up in being scared that, which, in the last podcast, I was talking about my anxieties. But,
yeah.
So I'm not meaning to fault parents for that. I understand that. But at the same time, not being engaged and not sitting and talking with your kids and just saying how everything is bad out there is not going to be helpful.
I think you're 100% right about that. And, we have to have our heads not in the sand. We have to have our eyes wide open as parents as to what the dangers are and where kids can get in trouble, where they can get in over their head, which is, today more than ever. But at the same time, we don't want to go to a fear-based parenting.
Well, and I'll tell you what happens is psychologically for kids, and I've dealt with this, in my own ways, is I think it's easy to take on a sense of powerlessness.
Yes.
So that if everything out there is bad and everyone out there is saying bad things and doing bad
everyone's
things.
A threat.
If everyone's a threat.
And everything's a threat.
Then that means that I am bound to be, hurt almost immediately. But it neglects the fact that we have all these strengths. It neglects the fact that we have these abilities to think through things and to engage the world, maybe in other ways that we haven't. So, there's the powerlessness comes out in all kinds of things, like going into a work situation and assuming that your superiors or not just your superiors, but your colleagues are always more right than you are, or it can kind of create this sort of sense that you're
in an inferior place.
In a constantly
inferior place. You're at risk
place.
all the time.
You're always at risk. And if you give input or if you stand up for yourself, you're always going to lose, which is interesting because I'm an adjunct professor of psychology in Azusa Pacific's grad school program. But there's a theorist by the name of Alfred Adler who has this belief that the main drive of being a person is to deal with our inferiorities and to go above that. And I don't know that I totally buy that, but I can see that a lot in some of my own life experience and in others' life experiences.
Yeah. Well, I think we're really getting into some interesting territory here because obviously there's lots of decisions, micro decisions and macro decisions that get made about how to navigate these waters with your kids and with yourself. A couple of things that seem really important to me would be to defend the innocence of children. It's so difficult, I think, as I was saying before in the last podcast. Your generation has an even bigger challenge than my generation of parents had in terms of just trying to defend the eyes, ears, and hearts of children because there's just so much influence coming from so many directions. But you can't put them in a bubble. And so how do we defend the innocence of children? How do we equip children? I'm reminded of the passage in 2 Timothy 1:7. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of love and power and a sound mind. And it seems that part of the way that we can equip kids in a culture like ours to avail themselves of the good things that are in the culture. And there are wonderful, good, awesome things in culture, and important for kids to be conversant in, and then also to defend their innocence and defend their hearts against the threats that are looming in culture, in a fallen world. But, finding that balance, part of it is yes, being aware of the threats, but part of it is really equipping kids with positivity, with love, power, and a sound mind, with helping them to see and to feel the difference inside themselves, for it to feel good to follow God, for it to feel good to make good choices about, behavior and thoughts and so forth. And so sometimes I think there's classically four kinds of parenting. There's the authoritarian parent, which is sort of the military parent who is very dualistic, right and wrong, good and bad, black and white. And, you kids, you got to stay on this side of the line. And if you cross over there, it's just, like you said, no mistakes are allowed. Yeah, you're just going to get creamed.
This parent is totally cut off from all their emotions. They neglect all of that. And there's nothing, like you said, it's either right or wrong. And our world that's a completely irrational way of engaging our world, is that either things are all right or all wrong.
Yes.
There are some things that are all right and all wrong, but absolutely.
Yeah, you can't. That seems to be more of a fear place come from, like a fear come from.
Totally.
But then there's the authoritative parent, and that's a parent who has a sense of themselves. They know their own struggles, but they also know their own values and their own convictions. They've settled some of the big issues in their life about who God is, about who they are, about what is good about living, what's life-giving, and they come from that place in their relationship with their children.
Yeah. This is the healthy parent, we would say, and
they're authorities, they're authoritative, but they're not overbearing.
Yeah, we can't go to the other side of this of being just buddies with our kids alone. Although there's a stage of development where kids are no longer kids and they're adults, and you get to enjoy a friendship, like we enjoy. Yeah. But you said this to me once about sort of healthy sort of self-confidence, self-assurance looks something like this, that you have, I think it was a hard core, or there's the core of the person is solid. Yeah. That's probably a better way to say it. You have a solid core as a person, but your exterior is malleable. Like you can listen to people and you can take differences of opinion, and you don't always have to assert that you're right. And you don't have to always assert your opinion. You can let someone go and in your mind be wrong about something, but let them figure it out for themselves.
Have dialogue.
And also you can admit that you don't have everything figured out. And unless you're Jesus, then you don't.
Yeah, and we aren't.
No.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, so I think that's right. Of course, another style of parenting, and you mentioned this a second ago, is that overly flexible parent. Like you said, that's just too wishy-washy, and there is no solid core of convictions. It's more, like you said, trying to be your kid's best friend, as if that was your entire role. And then, of course, and
it's the job of kids, for that parent, it's the job of kids to push. It's their developmental duty to push boundaries. It's their developmental duty to figure out what their world is.
Wow.
For kids,
Good point.
Their world is what they see as the globe is likely to be their home address, and maybe a couple other sort of things, but that's it. So they want to figure out what the edges are and everything there. And if you don't present those edges, and if you don't, present sort of what's okay and not okay, it leaves kids being really insecure in many cases. I need to look at the research on this specifically, but it doesn't help kids to be too wishy-washy.
Right.
We need to sort of say what's okay and what's not okay.
I mean, you hear that all the time. Like, one of the things is, well, we don't want to raise our children in a particular religious conviction because, we want them to grow up and figure it all out on their own. And, we don't have any opinions about morality and this and that because we want our kids to figure it out on their own.
Yeah, which is a deeply postmodern approach. And I'm sorry to do this again. But that's actually interesting is what's kind of come out in this election cycle at this point in 2016 is that apparently there are absolutes. Some people can say things and we can react that that's not okay and be definitive about that as opposed to saying, well, that's just his truth or that's just her truth. Well, no, we're all calling it as a spade and it's, etc.
Right.
So anyway.
Right. No, you're right. It's
a little sidetrack.
Yeah, but understandable. I think it's interesting. You and I, and also your brothers and your sister and I, and your mom. We've always had a interesting balance. My wife Robin grew up in a home that was more strict in its structure than my home was, and so before we were even parents, your mom used to say, "Well, when we have children, they're going to say yes, sir, and yes, ma'am, and they're going to say no, sir, and no, ma'am." And then she had a vision for a certain amount of structure in the home that was really not even on my radar at all, because it just wasn't my experience. And I'm a very much more of an intuitive person than she is anyway. So I just kind of like, it'll work out, But that's why I think we've been good parents, because we sort of combine both of those. I'm flexible and interested, and she's has convictions and ideas about structure that I don't have, and I think the blend is pretty good.
And that's true of a lot of parents, where you have ones that embody certain characteristics more than others, and we would look at that as attachment sort of based stuff, where what we experienced early on in our lives we take into our marriages, which we ultimately take into our parenting, is that how we attach, to our parents at a young age and learn security and learn okay. In fact, there's a whole bunch of interesting things in attachment about our image of God that, when we see a parent who is really wishy-washy, or when we see a parent who is too authoritative, as little kids, again, if our world as little kids is our home address, our view of God, when we get older, becomes sort of a projection of that world. So we look at God as someone who is a lot like our parents, and people who talk about. I had a friend who talked about she didn't really know her dad, never met him, never knew him, and she said
he was an absentee parent.
He was gone, which I know is the last one here, but
right.
But there she was talking about this, and she said, and the biggest thing I struggle with in my relationship with God is I feel like God is never there.
Yeah.
And as adults, as kids, who is all powerful, who knows everything, who provides for our needs, who tells us what's right and what's wrong? It's our parents.
Yes.
And so as adults, we take that and we bring it into our adult. And oftentimes we worship a God that we've projected and created out of that, as opposed to a God revealed from Scripture.
Yeah, there you go.
And, hence the sort of necessity for good hermeneutic and Bible interpretation and understanding. But there's sort of when we apply these principles, in effect, we're sort of modeling something about God to us, and I think we have the opportunity to do that as parents. So
yeah, definitely. Well, I want to just take a little bit of
the last one you have there is the absentee parent.
Oh yeah. Well, I'll tell you a quick story about that, which I will never forget. I think this is something that we don't think about as adults, which is that, as you were saying, a kid's world is very much less sophisticated. It's very much more simple. The moving parts are only a few. And so when a parent is absentee, we think that children understand the complexities of why that parent is absentee. And we think, oh, well, sure, you have to understand that this and that and the other. And there.
Yeah.
Well, I remembered walking this little girl to an event that I was in charge of when I was helping in a Christian elementary school. She was in third grade, and she was kind of known as the handful. She was kind of like a undisciplined kid in the school. And we were walking on our way to an event. I said, "Well, so tell me about your home. You got a mom and a dad at home. I mean, tell me." And she said, "I'll never forget this." She said, "Well, I have a mommy at home, but my daddy left me when I was 3 years old." And it sounds like something that any kid in that situation might just say, but I heard it in my spirit. My daddy left me when I was 3. It wasn't my daddy left my mommy. It wasn't my daddy left our house. It was my daddy left me.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I will never forget that. And she walked in her little girl mind. She was walking in that reality. Daddy left me.
And developmentally, that's absolutely right on, in that for kids, at a young age, they feel responsible for everything that happens.
Yeah, that's right.
I'll never forget this. Mom was backing out of a parking lot once, and I put a small, like AA battery under the car, or maybe it was like a D battery or something. But I put it under the tire of the car because I was like, I bet the car is going to do a big bump, and we're all going to think it's hilarious. And I just pulled this little prank. I'm 7 years old or whatever, right? And so Mom backs out and happens to hit another car, and I was in tears. I can't believe I did this. It's all my fault.
Well, I'm glad you're confessing that now on the radio. By the way, you're grounded.
Yeah. All right. I'll pray about it. But yeah, I remember thinking that because as a kid,
it's your fault.
When you're little, you look at not only your whole world in this way and pushing the boundaries, but you feel responsible for everything. So when mommy and daddy fight, what did I do to make you guys fight?
Absolutely. Or what can I do to make peace? Make them happy with each other.
Yeah. And we get into
How do I
all
please
kinds of
them?
Really unhealthy relationship patterns there.
Very, very true.
Yeah.
Well, I want to shift gears just the last few minutes that we have together today. It's something that Chris and I both love and are passionate about, and that is the arts, music, culture, things that have to do with creativity. That's one thing I've really enjoyed about being Chris's dad and a fellow adult with Chris. He and his brothers and sister have taught me a lot about music, about culture, about what's good to listen to. But there was a time when that was mostly my job. I had to mostly teach them about those things and kind of set some bars and some standards. And it wasn't always easy. I mean, there were some things, Chris, that you were into musically when you were in junior high and so forth that I was not acquainted with or comfortable with just on the surface, like screamo music and the hardcore bands that you played.
I was actually listening to some of that on the way here.
Some things never change.
Yeah.
But I actually went to some of the concerts with you. And you invited me. You said, "Well, come," and some of these bands were Christians, even though I couldn't understand a word they were saying,
sure.
but the kids knew what was happening.
Yeah.
But I found that by participating in your cultural growth, as not only a guide, but as a student, that it expanded my world. And also I think it must have said something to you and your siblings about, I don't know, what did it say to you and your siblings about culture and about creativity and about what's good and not good?
Every teenager is gonna have this sort of attitude of like, oh, my parents are here, it's not cool. But in their hearts, they're always like, "Sweet, my parents are here," And in most cases, and you don't have to be the parent who shows up and is like, "Honey, I'm down here," But guys sound that way too. I'm not just imitating.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Moms, but there's something about being able to look out and see your face or mom's face and to kind of go like, all right, cool. Like you guys aren't dressed like anybody else in the room.
We're not trying to be kids.
Yeah. But I think what was interesting was you kind of helped. I remember this. We went to, back in that day, they would release singles on cassette. Tape. And so, my friends and I would sneak over to my neighbor's house. We would watch MTV all the time. And, I remember being sort of excited about what I saw on MTV, but that, of course, was the edited version of the song.
Yeah.
And so your workaround on sort of being engaged but being disconnected was you can buy the single, but you can't buy the album.
Oh, yeah.
If you think about it,
that's funny. I forgot about that.
Well, but that's brilliant, too.
Yeah.
It's kind of a way to say, like, it's not all bad, it's not all scary, but try this. So that when it came to sort of my time to sort of play music or whatever, that was just something I think you recognized that I enjoyed, that Andrew enjoyed, that Matthew and Jean Ann have enjoyed in their own tastes and things is, all this different stuff. And you kind of let us run with it. And that I think was really critical.
Well, I think too, when I came to Christ, I was 15.
Yeah.
And music was my God.
Yeah.
Rock music in particular was I had a super album collection even at 15 years old. I have much older siblings, and so I was able to get hip to some pretty cutting edge stuff, but through them, and I loved all of it, and I wanted to be those guys. I studied the albums. I studied the lyrics. I studied the album art. I looked deeply into their lives. I wanted to dress like them, think like them, be like them. They were my heroes.
Yeah.
The way that some people have sports heroes or other heroes, And when I came to know Jesus at 15, I burned all my albums.
Yeah.
I mean, I dethroned my God. and that was a pretty big deal. But in the years since then, I've collected a number of those albums back, but not as my God. And I think that's the issue, is that I'm reading right now the book on creativity by Michael Gungor, who is a popular Christian musician or musician.
Well, not really anymore, but
okay, right. A controversial Christian musician.
That's a good one.
There we go.
Yeah,
but still, his book on creativity has been very interesting because it reminds me that there is no such thing as quote unquote Christian music, in the sense that there's no Christian notes, right, in the scale,
No.
And so we make those determinations as a matter of our own experience of the music, and so we can be inspired or touched or even slimed by any number of different kinds of genres and presentations. It's really the question of, what is God in my life? Who is God in my life? What am I worshiping? What am I submitting myself to? And so I've been able to enjoy a lot of music, both new and old, because I'm able to approach it as, hey, this stuff is not my God, but there is stuff here about music or movies, certain movies or cultural experiences that I really enjoy and sort of feed on, because they are truly, truly inspiring, interesting, edifying, or expanding of my world. But I know who God is, and I know who gets the last word in my life. And so I think if we can impart some of that to children, we say, hey, I remember teaching all of the kids, listen to the spirit of the music, not just the words. I would say, like for me in my generation, I always thought that the Doors were a really good band, really good singer, really good, really catchy music. But I always felt like there was a dark spirit in their music that I couldn't go there. I just couldn't, it was not good for my heart to listen to the darkness in that music, So I would teach you kids, don't just listen to the words, listen to the feel of the music or whatever. Now, you're a big movie buff.
Yeah.
And some of the movies that you watch were not movies that I would have had on display in our home growing up.
No.
So how do you manage that sort of thing?
Yeah, so actually it's interesting. I own, several hundred movies on Blu-ray and DVD, which is at this point, is pretty much on the way out. Physical media is all but dead. And I've lately kind of thought to myself, if perchance my daughters, were like, let's watch this movie, and they grabbed Goodfellas, and the opening scene is a guy getting stabbed brutally in the back of a car. I think that movie's brilliant in every way.
Yeah.
And for all its gratuity, it's also, I don't think, gratuitous in the sense that
doesn't glorify that stuff.
You don't watch that movie and at the end of it go, man, I really want to be a mobster.
Yeah, right.
You watch that movie and go, I want to be nowhere near these people.
Right.
And so I think it's brilliant. I think Scorsese's brilliant. But if my daughters watch that, I know it's going to really hurt them. And, just as I remember hurt me seeing things that, I wish I never saw when I was a kid. And so I'm sort of going through this purging process of getting rid of some of those things. And I'm like, it's not really worth it for me to have, the brilliant Copacabana scene, on home video, or whatever, movie available so that I can get enjoyment out of it if it, could potentially harm my family. The other thing I really enjoy is I play video games, and, it's really weird. This is really interesting. So culturally speaking, when we talk about engaging in the culture, you can't talk about kids without talking about this, and most adults now too. But when I played shooting games as a kid, it was from a side view, two-dimensional plane.
Yeah.
And, the animations...
You weren't the shooter in the sense that it was a first-person shooter thing.
The animations were, 3 or 4 frames of animation per, shooting the gun or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was you got rid of my copy of Double Dragon on the original Nintendo, which is like this really cheesy beat-em-up game. I remember it even felt kind of weird to me to play that game as a kid. But, I was playing a Call of Duty game a little while ago, and a few years ago, and there was a scene that was just this sort of brutal up close, sort of violent stabbing thing that happens in it, and I was like, done, I'm out. I don't want this. And I know people play it, and they'll make the arguments here and there, and all this stuff, and this is coming from a guy who owns more video games than he would for many systems. Anyway, but nonetheless. like I have to be careful about like if I'm enjoying some multiplayer, or whatever, the sense of realism and the sense of
identification with what's going on.
It's so much more constant and visceral, and that is to hook the gamer too, because that's what keeps us playing and keeps us buying more, and it's cool. It's all really fun, but it's like people ignore the ratings on that stuff and ignore what's going on there in ways it's kind of. I'm sort of thinking about what do I want to have in my home and what's okay with that.
Well, here comes virtual reality now, came
out this week. Yeah.
So, I mean, wow. That sense of identifying with things is going to get even stronger for kids playing games. Well, I can't believe we're out of time again already, and so we're definitely going to have to do more of these, Chris, but this has been really, really fun to kind of wade into some of these waters. We don't have all the answers. I'm not the perfect parent. Chris is not the perfect parent or the perfect son. Pretty close, but not quite. And all of his children, all of my children are true delights to their mother and me. I mean, we're so proud of all 4 of them and our 2 daughters-in-law as well. They have enriched our life so much, and we're so grateful for who they are and how they walk in this life. But we also know that it's an imperfect art, parenting, living. Any of this is all a matter of trying to sort through a lot of things the best we can. And so it really helps. We're hoping that this will help you as a listener to make some decisions or to take some postures with your own children or even with your own self about some of these issues. And we'll definitely come back to this in the future and open it up again.
Love it.
All right. Well, thanks again for listening to this podcast of Gracelets Audio, and we hope that you'll listen to others that are on display on post. Oh, before we check out, Chris, you're a Christian therapist.
Yeah.
How do people get a hold of you?
People can get a hold of me through my website, which is Christopher Faris, that's Faris, counseling.com. I'm in Costa Mesa and would love to have the chance to speak with you.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks again for listening. This has been another Gracelets Audio production.
This has been a Gracelets audio presentation from Bill Faris, MPC. For more brief and full-length audio messages from Bill, visit his page at Spreaker.com. And don't forget to share your comments with Bill by writing him at billferris@billferris.com. Thanks for listening.